welcome author, poet, and musician Thaddeus Ó Buachalla.
Hi, Geraldine. Thanks very much for having me on.
So, growing up in Cork City, what were your earliest memories of being drawn to both the Irish language and music?
Well, I suppose there's two separate answers to that. I suppose musically, there was a lot of music in my family. On my mother's side, my uncle, he played in a kind of a famous show band. Theo Cal was his name. He played in the Dixies. I was actually called after him. He was Thaddeus Cal,
Mm,
and I was called after him.
mm,
But I suppose kind of really that it kind of showed me. I mean, they played in Carnegie Hall. I think they were on Top of the Pops or something. But it kind of showed me that it's possible for to get into music and to play music and to kind of to do well and to become successful. So it was kind of almost template in a way.
hmm
And my mother then kind of pushed me when I was 12 to just take up the guitar to play music as well. So she was kind of a big support as well. But as well as that, there was my father. My father didn't play any musical instrument, but he was a great singer.
hmm
He loved singing. Like we'd go someplace and he'd be up singing. And I think really my first memory of music, of recognizing what music is, I can remember specifically the point. It was, you know, that kind of windy road going into Crosshaven
hmm
along the coast there. And we were driving around. I was around 3 hours of age, sitting in the back seat. We were going down to Crosshaven, down to the Marys. And my father was in the front seat blasting out Spanish Eyes. You know that song, "Ooh, Spanish Eyes."
Mm-mm.
And I remember sitting there going, "That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's amazing." And it always stuck in my head. So like that kind of love of just being able to sing and to play and to create something like that, that it always kind of it stuck with me. So I suppose that those were kind of the earliest kind of
hmm
memories. And musically, I suppose it grew from that. With Irish language, then I suppose it's a different kind of a story.
mm
And I suppose it makes me kind of think of our evolving relationship with the Irish language in
mm.
Ireland. Because in truth, growing up in Cork City in the 70s and the 80s, there wasn't really a lot of Irish around me. I mean, today there are Gael skulls everywhere, but they weren't there then. And my family didn't speak Irish, so I wasn't raised speaking Irish.
hmm
But I think I always did have a fondness for it.
Okay.
But it was after I left school. I mean, I suppose I got the kind of normal bit that you'd get from a normal secondary school. But it was after I left school, I made a kind of a conscious decision that I was going to speak Irish. And once I did, it kind of snowballed.
hmm
I started going to the library, taking up books, reading through them with a dictionary, trying to figure it out. And then I done night classes. And then I said, look, I'll do a degree in Irish.
Gosh.
And then I done really well in the degree, and then I said I do a PhD.
hmm
So I kind of went from not really speaking any Irish to having a PhD, but just it the Irish language kind of just took over my life really.
Okay.
And it was a fantastic kind of thing really to happen. It just changed my life, the Irish language. From growing up in Cork, I didn't really have it there, but I had to find it myself.
I would have assumed actually that you came like that your whole family spoke, Irish, that you were brought up with it. So I'm kind of surprised to hear that that wasn't the case, that
No.
it was a choice that you made so as such.
It was. It was a
hmm
choice, and it's one of the best choices I've ever made,
Yeah.
really. It's fantastic, like, but I think it does reflect the kind of journey that the country is on,
Mm.
really, that we're accepting that Irish is there for all of us, that we can all speak it, and you just need to make the choice to say, "Right, I'm going to do it."
Okay.
And you can go as far as you want with it and do as much, and it is changing. Ireland is changing in that respect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's really you can do it. You know, it's not this closed door. You can choose to just open it and
Yeah. So you really did open the door. You hold a PhD in modern Irish from UCC. How did your
yeah.
time, I suppose, studying shape your creative voice as both a writer and musician?
Well, it had an enormous effect,
hmm
really. I mean, the UCC really kind of gave me so much. It's just such it was such an amazing place, an amazing experience. Maybe not so much as a musician, because when I went to UCC, I went there specifically for literature,
hmm
for language. So my degree course was in English and Irish and English. So it was all literature really that I was studying.
Okay.
And in first year for my arts degree, I done music as well. I took classes with in Shanos with Eilish Ní
Okay.
which was great. But mostly UCC for me was for literature,
Mhm.
and I suppose I intentionally went to UCC to become a writer. I suppose I had been writing things since I was very young
Mhm.
in English, but kind of unsuccessfully, really.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
But I suppose not many people see academia as a route to creativity,
Mm.
but it really is, and it really was for me. And I wanted to write, and I wanted to write in Irish, and it,
Okay.
it really gave me that. So I studied Irish and English for the degree, and with the Irish, I was able to get the wealth, the diversity of Irish literature, and and prose and poetry, and it really kind of I got so much wisdom from that really, and a historical perspective of Irish literature.
Okay.
And it's such incredible lecturers in the Department of Modern Irish. Remember, Alan Titley was there. He was head of the department when I was there, and an amazing novelist himself.
Mhm.
And having kind of people like that just there teaching you, and it was incredible. And then with the English, I studied a lot of great literature as well, but also like literary theory and principles of literary criticism.
Mhm.
And I learned how to analyze literature, I suppose, much more kind of philosophical
Mhm.
perspective. And
Mm.
I became really interested in postmodern literature. Now, postmodernism is kind of it's art that kind of has an awareness of itself and an awareness of its place within the world, within greater society. It kind of reflects that. And so then I decided then that I wanted to do a PhD on the postmodern novel
Mhm.
in Irish literature, and I was very lucky to do that with Dr. Padraig Riggs. What I was doing really, I wanted to write postmodern fiction in Irish,
Okay.
and I wanted to figure out how do you do that, and there is no textbook on how to do that. So I decided I'd write it.
Yeah.
That was my PhD thesis. The PhD was figuring out how do I do this, and L is a postmodern novel. So I was figuring out how do you write a postmodern novel. So I wrote the textbook on how to do it, and then I wrote it.
Very
So it
good.
did it directly influenced me. It taught me, but that's why I went to UCC. I went
Yeah.
to learn how to become a writer and how to become an Irish language writer, and it really gave it to me. The UCC is just an amazing place. It kind of created everything that I have really as a writer now. It gave me the basis, and the guidance that I got from lecturers there and the people that are there was just immense. There's so much amazing, like people think like postmodernism in Irish literature. People are going, is there such a thing? And
Yeah.
is Peg postmodern? And
Yeah.
it isn't, by the way. But really, like postmodernism is a kind of I actually think that the Irish invented literary postmodernism.
Yeah.
This, you see, the PhD thesis I had it published later as a book,
Mhm.
and it's I kind of describe it in a way that, like they say, the first postmodern novel was either Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce or A Swim Two Birds by Flann O'Brien, and so kind of the Irish really invented literary postmodernism, and then 40 years later, the French came up with theories to
Mm.
explain it to themselves. It's in a way, postmodernism was a way of kind of almost filling the vacuum that the absence of the Irish language, the
Mm.
suppression of the Irish language, created. And it was another kind of a voice that the Irish evolved, really. So it did really, it gave me a kind of a philosophical understanding of literature, and how to find a voice. Like UCC kind of gave me that, and
Okay.
it really did kind of bring me along, really, I think, in so
Absolutely.
many ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And how do your dual lives as an academic and a creative artist feed into one another when you sit down to start a new project?
They do feed into each other in a lot
Mhm.
of ways, really. I think academia kind of gave me discipline.
Mhm.
It gave me, I mean, I've been maybe trying to write things before, but it showed me how to really focus my
Mhm.
energy. Like I said, maybe people don't see academia as a route to creativity, but it really does. Like,
It
you
structured
can,
your creativity, I suppose, so as such.
it does, and it
Mhm.
teaches you a kind of a structure. Like, I suppose I have a kind of a way that I write myself. I mean, many writers would start with a blank page and they would just start writing. You know,
Mhm.
I don't do that. I kind of take the approach that I learned at UCC from writing essays. I work out what I'm going to say first.
Mhm.
I structure it. I bullet point it. I break it down. when you plan everything out like that, it kind of it takes the pressure off then. When you start writing it then, you can be expressive, you can use the language, you're free to use the language. The heavy
Mm,
lifting of figuring out what the story is done.
mm.
Now the plan that you make is, it'll change, but
Fluid,
it's
yeah.
there,
Mhm.
but it gives you this kind of, this kind of, freedom.
Roadmap as such, yeah.
Yeah, it does. It really it helps you, and, so kind of academia and creativity really do was a way that I learned how to do it really, and it
Okay.
it did help me so much. But, like, writing literary criticism itself is a very creative thing.
Mm,
Like, the PhD, which later was published as Clochain's Squilt, you know, literary criticism is your perspective on a piece of literature, and you can create a totally new way of looking at something, at a novel or a poem or something, which is very exciting.
mhm,
In a lot of ways, I think the PhD thesis was one of the most creative things I've done. It has, it's your vision.
mhm,
You read a book and you can find things in it. It's almost like you're a detective,
mm,
and you're finding things in it that nobody else has ever seen, and you're bringing this out, and it's. I mean, that's creativity as well, really. So, academia in the arts.
mhm.
I mean, that is like. I mean, it's called an arts degree for a reason because you're studying art. So they blend and they do really work together.
Okay, okay. And speaking about your novel, Elle, where did the initial spark come for it?
I know the exact point that it
Okay.
actually started. It was in the kitchen of a house in Gardeners Hill in Cork City, and it was late in the evening, and I was sitting down. The light was on, and there were two flies. Do you
Mhm.
know how flies make these kind of misshapen rectangles underneath light bulbs, and they're
Mm,
back and
mm,
forth, and they're swirling around each other? And I was sitting there, and I was looking up at them, and I was thinking, can you imagine? Oh, because they look like little flying machines, really.
mm.
And I was going, can you imagine if there were a couple of tiny microscopic little men inside in each of those flies, flying them around and
Mm.
having like a little dog fight under the light bulb? And I don't know, it's just a kind of an absurd little idea that came into my head. But I don't know, maybe it's a sign of madness or something. But yeah, it was the kind of the impetus really for the novel.
Okay.
I suppose not many people come up with absurd ideas and then spend years trying to turn it into a 300-page book.
Yeah.
But it was just the kind of impetus. But like L is kind of a lot more than that. I mean, that's the basic fantasy idea
Mhm.
of it. But it kind of grew into so much more than that. But the initial spark
Came from
was
that.
Gardener's Hill in the kitchen at night, looking at flies under the light bulb.
Gosh, one of those flashbulb moments so as such,
It
isn't it?
literally a
Yeah.
light, yeah, this light bulb moment, like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very good. And what, I suppose, compelled you then to explore like modern anxieties like AI, deepfakes, and social media deception through the lens of this historical conspiracy?
Well, I suppose kind of modern, I suppose digital deception, if you want to call it that,
Mm,
has many methods. And one is putting truths together in a way that makes falsehoods believable.
mm,
And conspiracy theories work like that. They take
mm,
things that are true that we know, and they just put them together in a way that makes something that isn't true at all makes it plausible.
mm,
And history is one of those dependable truths. Really, it's kind of these things that we depend on. I suppose that's questionable, but as well in the sense that that the victors write the history. So it was kind of an exercise in displaying this mechanism in a literary form, this mechanism of deception. So in a sense, like that, the way that conspiracy theories work, that they put these truths, these falsehoods together, or truths together in a way that makes falsehoods kind of believable. That's what I done with L.
mhm,
I done loads of historical research, kind of an immense amount, really, and I kind of concocted a believable story to make this ridiculous, absurd notion that little tiny microscopic
mm,
men exist in the world. But I tried to make it as believable as possible. And it's incredible. It's like I think coincidences are kind of very important in that. And if you start looking for coincidences in history, you'll
mm.
find them. And it'll be bizarre. Like, I mean, I found a few things and I went, "Oh my God, this is starting to seem believable even to myself,
Yeah.
you know? So I did really kind of try to find the way of using history as a way of making something which was unbelievable, fantastical, and making it seem like it was plausible. The idea is that the reader will look at the book and will say, "Hang on a sec, this can't be true. It's starting to seem plausible," you know. But
Yeah.
it's to kind of play with that kind of idea in the reader's head, that the reader knows that there aren't tiny microscopic
Yeah.
men in
Yeah.
flies, but at the same time, it's starting to become more and more plausible.
And it sucks
You
the
know,
reader in, doesn't it? Like that's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
like the narrator in the book, I mean, he speaks directly to the reader,
Mm.
and he says, "Look, I know this is kind of unbelievable, but I swear to you, it's true. Like this book now isn't a novel. It's not a novel at all. It's an truth as I see it. And look, if you don't believe me, take your phone out of your pocket, go online and start looking at the internet and look up the people in the historical story parts of this story, and you see that they're all there, and they are like
Yeah.
I stuck as much as I could to historical accuracy. Like everything in the story is true, apart from the things that aren't true.
Yeah.
Namely, that there are little men in flies, but everything else is true. You know,
Very good.
I try to stick to the actual facts as much as possible. But I do kind of like that. I think in a way I do feel myself kind of influenced by George Orwell.
Mhm.
Like George Orwell used fantasy to create political satire. Like 1984 is a futuristic novel. Animal Farm is a fantasy.
Mm.
So I do that as well. I use fantasy in order to create satire and a kind of to create a kind of a view on the world. But you know, I suppose this idea of AI and deepfakes and this deception, this is the world that we live really, and I think all artists, all writers, whether they like it or not, reflect the age we live in. And I kind of do this purposely. But and I suppose as well, I grew up at a time before the internet,
Mhm.
you know, and I can see the difference that it has created in the world. It is, I mean, there has always been fake narratives. There have always been this deception has always existed, and we think of the divine right of kings. This idea that the kings are appointed by God.
Mm.
You know, this notion was just created, and very conveniently for the kings themselves.
Mm.
But
Absolutely.
it became this truth that everyone believes in, and everyone accepted it, and it created terrible, awful catastrophes in people's lives because it gave power to these people. I think even though this kind of deception has always existed, it is accelerating with the
Mm.
internet. The,
Mm.
the internet is an enormous thing in the world. Really, the new technology that we have is going to utterly change life as we know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm doing this. I'm writing a new novel as well now in Irish, and I kind of I do this as well. Really, I kind of try and tackle deception and lies and fascism
Mm.
really as well. You know, this new book is based on a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, but and it's set back in the times of Bosch.
Mhm.
So it's in the Netherlands in the late 15th century. But it's again, it's a satire on how people can kind of get beguiled, how good people can kind of get beguiled into a kind of a violent totalitarian fascist regime.
Mhm.
You know, and so that's I've kind of continued this with my new book, and it is also Bosch. It's all
Mm.
very kind of a hellscape, kind of bizarre, kind of a, paintings. All his paintings are kind of like that, most of them. But so it is kind of a fantasy. So
Mm.
again, I'm using fantasy as satire, really. You know?
Okay. And Elle asks, I suppose, who controls reality? As someone kind of deeply immersed in storytelling, what role do you think artists and authors play in a world where disinformation spreads like wildfire?
Well, I suppose stories
Hmm.
are the most powerful thing in the world. You know, people think, oh, it's armies and navies and bombs and banking and all that. But stories behind everything, stories, everything that you do has to be backed up by a story. Politics, everything. It's all narrative. Everything is narrative. Everything we live our lives with reference to the stories that we grew up with. You know, stories of history and culture. And everything forms a backdrop, if you like, to our consciousness. So in creating stories, we can speak out against the false narratives.
Mm.
You know, stories can do immense damage in themselves.
Mm.
stories
Absolutely.
in politics and like these kind of deep fakes and all this kind of this internet deception. We can confront those who would use stories to harm others and to control others. In a way, I suppose stories are our way of making sense of the world as well.
Mm,
Like, I mean, writing L, it was, in a way, me trying to make sense of the world around me. Storytellers can highlight the methods of manipulation,
mm,
and L and the new novel Arizalius does this as well.
okay.
Satire is important. The poets in ancient Ireland, they were very, very powerful because they could satirize the king, and they had this power. So to be able to use a story or a poem or something like that to speak out against the lies and against this false reality, and
Hmm.
against this, like you said, with disinformation spreads, to be able to speak out against it, it is powerful, and storytelling is very, very strong, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And Elle won the Irish Language Novel of the Year, which is a massive achievement. What was the biggest hurdle you faced bringing this complex novel to publication?
Well, it actually wasn't too hard really, because,
Okay.
and I suppose this brings in my connection between me as a musician and a writer. I was living in Dublin for a long while, and I met a lot of musicians and everything up there. So I met people in Keela,
Hmm.
the band there, and there are three of the members in Keela, the three O'Snuddig brothers. So there's Ronan, Ross, and Cullum. I would be very friendly with them, and I was chatting to them one day, and I was talking about my PhD thesis and how I'd love to get it in print, and I suppose you spend so long writing a PhD, you don't want it to just sit on a shelf someplace. So he said, "Why don't you have a chat with my father?" So his father is Padraig Osnoig,
Okay.
he passed away last year, sadly, but he owned the publishing company, the Irish language publishing company, Cushkane. So I spoke to him, and he was an amazing man. So we got Cluckhain to Squeet, which was the title of my PhD thesis. I wrote a few extra chapters as well. So, and once I got that in print, then I said, well, I have a novel as well that I want to write. And he goes, great, right away. Once it was written, then Cush Game published it for me.
Great. Yeah. So it wasn't like, I suppose you had that initial contact that helped an awful
I
lot.
had,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had, yeah,
Okay.
they'd already published one book for me, so when they were more than willing then to publish the second one, to publish L. Yeah.
Okay. And have you faced specific challenges in getting your Irish language work to a wider audience, or has it been manageable, or has it been easy to achieve, do you think?
Well, I suppose you kind of have to accept as an Irish language writer that bookshops won't be having your books delivered by forklift.
Mm.
It's. So, but I suppose you still have to believe that it's a changing situation.
Mm,
Like, many more people speak Irish now. There are Cork all over the country.
mm,
Like, even in West Cork, there is even Gaelgori Ihor Corky, which is an umbrella group of all of the different Cork in each town. So
mhm,
that there are connections being made, and it is changing. Ireland
mhm.
is changing in relation to the Irish language. It's I think the Gael skull really is an amazing thing. There
Absolutely,
are
yeah.
generations grow up of young people who own the language,
Mm,
and it is their language, and it has changed things, and
absolutely, yeah.
it's fantastic to see, really.
Very good, very good. Elle has been translated into English by Mercier. How did that come about?
To me, I suppose it's good to kind of bring it out to a kind of a wider audience, to people who can't speak Irish.
Mhm,
But as well as that, it's good to draw attention to the fact that Irish language literature is there,
mhm.
that these works are being produced, and I think really there isn't that kind of awareness, because English language media seems largely to ignore Irish language
Yeah.
literature. I mean, you have like if you have music and film, and that is kind of widely broadcast, like bands like Kneecap and Keela, that you get them, they make the headlines, and films like on Colin Kuhn, people speak about that, but there isn't really that awareness of Irish language literature. So the idea that there is a book out there with translated from the Irish, this was something that I wanted to do, to draw attention to the fact that Irish language literature is there,
Mhm.
and it's great to be with Mercier. Mercier are an amazing company, really, as well. And it might actually draw attention to the to the original Irish version as well. That, the fact that there is an English language book there, and maybe some people might help people to read the Irish language version as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose this was part of the reason why I translated it,
Mm.
that, it is drawing attention to the Irish language, the original Irish language version. And, there is this kind of gap, I think, with Irish language literature, that people don't really kind of know. Like, I remember when I got the An Post award,
Mm.
people said to me, it's great that people are writing Irish language literature, but like they never stopped. It was always there. So having it published now in English, I think it's a good thing for both, really, for both the Irish and the English.
And how did you find the actual process of doing it?
It was I it was maybe tricky enough. It's hard to translate your own work. You're going
Yeah.
to be very kind of sensitive about something that you've put so much heart and effort and thought into, and you're going to want to try and keep the essence of the book. But then two different languages work differently.
Yes, yeah,
Even from
yeah.
a technical point of view, you translate something directly, it just seems kind of clunky then
Mm.
in the other language, because just the technical kind of aspects of the language. But so it was kind of it has its own kind of merits translating it yourself,
Mm.
because you know that this is what the way that you want it to be.
Mm, mm, mm.
But it wouldn't be as nice a process maybe as originally writing the book
A
though.
book. But I
Yeah.
suppose there is the benefit though that like if you got someone else to translate it, it probably would have lost a little bit. Whereas when you're translating yourself, as you say, you know what the whole meaning, the very in depth meaning of the book is,
Exactly
and
that
you're able to
that
translate that in maybe not literally, but what the way it's meant to be read as. Yeah.
exactly
Mm.
there is the fact that I kind of knew where I was coming from in the first place, that I kind of knew the right way to translate things, I suppose. So yeah, there is that. It's a very good point.
Very good. Very good. Okay. And speaking, I suppose, to your music now, you play an
Hmm.
incredible mix of instruments. How did your musical journey begin? I know you mentioned there about your parents were kind of influential in terms of singing
Hmm.
and music, but what led you to such diverse sounds?
Well, I started playing guitar when I was 12,
Hmm.
and I suppose I always kind of looked to different avenues and tried to expand things and explore different ways of playing. Like, as a teenager, I kind of I was very bold, really. I'd kind of go on the hop from school, but I'd go into
Never.
the I'd go into the I did. But what I do is I kind of got an almost a better education. I'd go into the city centre, and after I'd kind of spent my money on pool and Space Invaders, I'd go to the music library, and I'd sit there and I'd listen. At the time you could the tables had little sockets for headphones, and you could pick out vinyl records and sit there. I discovered things like Miles Davis, Jimi Hendrix, BB King, all the kind of '60s psychedelia, and it really kind of expanded my mind musically like that. So, like when I was young, I played a lot of electric blues guitar.
Hmm.
It's mad. I got into playing traditional Irish music then, but in a very strange way, really, because this was around the time of Sir Henry's
Right.
and the techno rave scene,
Thought it
which
was
I
the
got really
days,
into
yeah.
as well. And so I went and I bought a Roland R5 drum machine with sample bass, and I kind of knew people playing trad, and I went, wouldn't it be great if we kind of got a band which
Hmm.
done that, which kind of had techno and trad. We were actually called Lunasa, which is the
Hmm.
name of another band since that became very big, but we had the name first, strangely. But but we if it all falls apart, I can always sue them. That's my
Exactly,
retirement
yeah.
plan. So then I played loads of trad, and then I got a job playing in an Irish bar in Abu Dhabi. So I was there for 3 months, and I came back with an Arabic lute, an
Mm,
oud.
mm.
Then I lived in Dublin, and I played in a band called Mandala, which was a mixture of Indian and Arabic and jazz and trad and everything. There's a great sitar player who's living in Cork now, Dara O'Brien. So it was sitar, oud, bass clarinet, soprano, saxophone, tabla, hammer dulcimer. So we had this really eclectic sound
Yeah.
and mixed different styles, and I suppose even in college I learned learning sean-nós from Eilish Ní Thuilleamh, and now I suppose a lot of ways I play the oud with spoken word and with sean-nós as
Mm.
well. So I was singing kind of a sean-nós, but to play the oud with it. I suppose it's all really just experimenting, seeing what works. Like I've a house, I've loads of
Loads
instruments in the
of
house, that's just some
bursting
of
at the
them.
seams.
Yeah, I wish I can play it to varying degrees.
Yeah.
I kind of pick things up and go, oh, I get that, and next thing it's there, and it's fantastic.
How do you decide which instrument best serves like the story or poem you're trying to tell on stage?
I suppose the story itself will kind of inform
Dictate
you,
it.
really.
Okay.
Like I have this poem, quite a long enough poem, but it's quite a surreal poem. It's almost like a kind of a desert-like post-apocalyptic world. In a way, it's kind of a commentary on the
Mhm.
world we're living in. But it's I would improvise on the oud while reciting it,
Mm.
which is kind of a nice thing to do. You can kind of you kind of focus really on both things at the same time. That you're reciting a poem, but you can kind of just improvise with the oud and just let the two things kind of blend together. And then I suppose like Imram on Frechan, which is the long poem that I've written. It's about 40 minutes to
Mm.
recite, but it's a journey through Cork City at night, and it's almost like kind of a Dante's Inferno kind of a thing. Like, so it's quite jazzy, really, in that sense that it's a kind of a cityscape, but it's a blend as well. Like, my wife Sam, she plays the harp, and then I
Mhm.
have Paul McMahon, who's another great writer. Actually, he plays bass and guitar, and Mose Jacobs on saxophone. So there's this kind of harp with saxophone and kind of jazz, and it blends. So it's the story itself, really, that can
Okay.
kind of inform really what you can do. But like all that can change. I
Yeah.
mean, I'd like to kind of do Imran and Frecon as a solo project, maybe using more electronic or recorded sounds mixed with live playing and mixed with instruments as well.
Okay. Okay. So
Mm.
it's kind of it depends on the mood as well, I suppose, as everything else.
It
Okay.
is really
Okay.
like how you kind of feel that what you think the work itself is projecting, but how you feel at the time and how
Absolutely.
you'd
Yeah.
like to, yeah, how you'd like to do it,
Okay.
and you can always change it and do something else with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's the joy of being creative, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
And you've collaborated with different groups and individuals. What's the most important lesson you've learned about staying true to your own artistic vision in these collaborations?
Well, I suppose you'd collaborate with like-minded people as
Mm.
well, you know. So you'd I think when you connect with people that you do have a kind of a shared vision in a lot
Mm.
of ways, you know. But you also have to be open to other people's vision. But there are so many great musicians,
Mhm.
really, in that I've played with, really, and like Cork City as well has so much going on. And, like even the trad scene, there's a great trad scene in Cork City. Like I've played for years in the Sinead,
Mhm.
but Clonakilty as well has a great trad scene. And but collaboration, it's a fantastic thing, really. It kind of brings you to places that you wouldn't otherwise
Mm.
go,
Okay.
and it is kind of bigger than the sum of its parts, really.
Okay.
Like.
Okay.
Mhm.
And how does the energy of a live multimedia performance compare to the solitary experience of writing a novel?
They are, I suppose, a different kind of a
Mm.
headspace when you're doing it. I mean, the energy of the crowd, and the tension of keeping all the plates spinning,
Mm.
and the poem is created in a kind of a solitary space. But that can have its own kind of intense energy as well when
Mm.
you're writing. So they both have this kind of energy. But in a way, the live performance is fed by the energy of the solitary creativity as well. That
Mhm.
you're
Mhm.
trying to connect those two moments in time together, that you are bringing one into the other. And maybe in a lot of ways, a lot of my poetry is kind of written a lot of times for live performance, for
Mhm.
spoken word with music. you know y- you can really kind of you can blend it, really. It
Okay.
is a blend in a
Okay.
lot of ways.
And balancing the roles of being an award-winning poet, novelist must be demanding. What have been the biggest challenge in managing the different outlets?
Well, I suppose the focus
Mhm.
shifts, really, when you're writing. It can take up an awful lot, especially the novel. Writing a novel just takes up so much. So you kind of have to step back a bit
Mm.
from other projects. And I have had to say, look, I can't really do this now for a while. And, because like the novel can be all consuming,
Mhm.
more than anything else. And you're creating a world and you're living in it when you're writing it, and it takes kind of time. So you do have to focus on one thing. And a good friend of mine said a while ago, we only actually have time for one and a half obsessions.
Well, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you'll do one and then you'll have to do the other one.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
so really, I think focusing really is important. You
Yeah,
know.
it's the key. Yeah, yeah. Okay. And when you look at the cultural scene in Cork today, how well do you feel it supports multidisciplinary artists who want to blend literature, music, and the spoken word?
Well, Cork is a thriving
Mm,
artistic scene. It has a huge energy, and I think there is a demand for that kind of eclectic, innovative art.
mm-hmm.
And once there's a demand, then it will, it will happen. And
It'll
you do
find its
find,
place. Yeah.
yeah, you will find there are great things happening around Cork, and I think it's important that there are small venues.
Mm-hmm.
I think small venues are really serve an immense purpose. There are spaces like I think like upstairs above the roundy, it's kind of open for doing kind of eclectic kind of things like that. And there probably could be some more. I think like you only need a very small space, you know. I mean, I remember the first gig I ever done was in the Phoenix.
Oh, yeah.
No, the upstairs in the Phoenix, they've changed it now. It's probably fire regulations, but between the first story and the second story, they cut away part of the ceiling, so the top floor was basically a balcony, and so that was an amazing gig space.
Mm-hmm.
But like even in Dublin, I used to go to the International Bar, and there was a tiny room above the bar, and they had singer songwriters one night and comedians the next night, and all of the Damien Dempsey, Paddy Casey, all the big comedians, they all came out of that little room.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you just have a little room with a stage, doesn't have to have a massive PA, doesn't have to have anything, just have that and give it a space to people who are trying things out, and that can really a few of them in the city. If there were a few more of them, it would change things.
Let the magic
But
happen.
Cork is
Yeah.
let the magic happen. That's
Mm,
it. You know.
mm, mm.
Mm.
And what's, I suppose, looking back at your incredible journey across music, academia, and literature, what's one thing you wish you'd known when you're first starting out in Cork's creative community?
I I don't know if I'd kind of maybe look at it that way. Like it's all been a journey, and
Yeah.
like it's not over yet. Like everything is part of the journey, and everything has its own time and place, really. And you need to give yourself time to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a lot of ways. Maybe if I had done one thing differently, or maybe would things have been different. But at the same time, it's all a journey, and you have to let it happen in its own way, really.
It's not about the end point, it's about how you get
It's
there,
it's
sort of.
not.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is exactly,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And what's the best piece of advice you'd give a young musician or a writer in Cork?
I suppose kind of just trust your own voice, and believe that you have a vision which is different from other people's. It might not necessarily be better or worse, but it's different and it's unique. And I suppose believe that you can't do everything straight away, but that given time, you have the capacity to figure things out, and to believe that you can really kind of make things happen if you just kind of focus your energy on it. And time is long. You have
Mm,
space to explore and discover what you want to do. As artists, we have our whole lives really. It's
mm-hmm.
not you don't have to do everything when you're young. Or creativity is something that grows and it evolves, and it's beautiful. Really, like so just enjoy it, and it's kind of part of who you are, and it always will be. So just enjoy the journey, and trust that you have a vision, and stick to it.
Very good. Well, on that note of positivity, thank you so much, Thaddeus, for taking the time to chat to us on the Cork Creative Podcast. If you want to find more about information about Thaddeus and his work, you can find links on corkcreative.ie.
Thank you very much, Geraldine.